She thought she was escaping her past by hiding in a rundown motel with her daughter. But when the man next door turned out to be a billionaire CEO with secrets of his own, everything she thought she lost was about to find her again. The motel room smelled faintly of mildew and cheap detergent, and the air conditioning unit in the window rattled like it was trying to hold itself together. Emma Brooks stood in the doorway for a moment, her 2-year-old daughter asleep on her shoulder, one arm cradling her and the other gripping the handle of a battered duffel bag. She took a breath, then crossed the threshold and kicked the door shut behind her. Room 8, the cheapest room in the cheapest motel she could find without leaving the city entirely. It had been a split-second decision. There was no plan, no roadmap, just adrenaline and instinct, and the overpowering need to run from the signed divorce papers, from her ex-husband's indifference, from the empty house that no longer felt like a home. She lowered Bella carefully onto the double bed, with its outdated patchwork quilt and mismatched pillows. The child stirred but didn't wake. Emma crouched beside her, brushing a lock of golden brown hair off her daughter's forehead, watching her chest rise and fall. They had nowhere to go, no family in the city, friends who had vanished the moment the marriage began to unravel. Her savings were a whisper. Everything she owned was in the car or stuffed into the duffel by the bed. She had $23 in cash and a prepaid phone that barely worked. And yet, this room with its flickering lamp and stained curtains felt more like safety than anything she'd known in months. Emma collapsed onto the second bed with a deep sigh, shoes still on, arms sprawled at her sides. The silence was heavy, but not threatening. Just empty. Still. She could breathe in this silence, even if it carried the sting of failure. From the other side of the wall, a low voice broke the quiet. Male. Calm, deep, and confident, like someone used to being listened to. Emma froze, listening unintentionally. The voice wasn't yelling, but it carried intensity, frustration maybe, like he was trying to fix something no one else could see. No, that's not what I said. I said the merger will fail if we ignore the acquisition contract's fine print, the voice argued, then paused. Yes, I know I disappeared. That doesn't mean I stopped paying attention. She blinked. The voice wasn't just confident, it was familiar. Not in a personal way, but like something she'd heard through a screen or on the radio. Polished, controlled. He didn't sound like someone who belonged in a place like this. Who checked into a rundown roadside motel and held corporate-level calls at midnight? Emma pushed the thought away. Not her business. She was here to stay invisible, not to figure out her neighbor's life. Besides, tomorrow she had more important things to worry about, like figuring out where to find formula without a car battery that kept dying, or how to call her lawyer without her ex tracing the number. It was too much, too fast. She stood up slowly, pulled the blanket over Bella, then tiptoed into the bathroom. The water ran cold, of course. She cupped her hands under it anyway and splashed her face, staring at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were puffy, her long dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her cheeks pale. She didn't recognize herself. Not the woman who had once dreamed of opening a boutique art studio. Not the wife who had tried for years to be enough. Not the mother who was now building a life from scratch with nothing but stubbornness and a toddler. Back in the room, Bella whimpered in her sleep. Emma hurried to her, stroking her back softly until she settled again. Her daughter was her anchor now, her reason, her everything, and she would fight tooth and nail to protect her, even if it meant starting over from nothing. Even if it meant living next to a mysterious man with a voice like steel and a presence that made her skin hum without seeing him. Emma lay down next to Bella and closed her eyes. The walls might have been thin, the bed lumpy, and her future uncertain. But in that moment, all that mattered was the steady sound of her daughter breathing beside her, and the faint, steady voice still echoing through the wall. She had no idea yet just how close her life was to changing again. No idea that the stranger on the other side wasn't just another lost soul in a cheap motel, but a man whose presence would challenge everything she thought she knew about safety, love, and starting over. Emma woke up to the sound of Bella's soft, whimpering just before dawn. Pale blue light filtered through the stained motel curtains as the child stirred restlessly under the blanket. Her daughter's cheeks were flushed, her fingers curled tightly around the hem of Emma's shirt. "Mama," Bella whispered, her voice barely audible. Emma sat up immediately, brushing Bella's hair back, her hand automatically moving to the child's forehead. Warm, not dangerously so, but warm enough to make her stomach clench. Bella had barely eaten dinner the night before, too exhausted from the emotional upheaval, too confused by the new environment. Emma had been so focused on holding herself together that she hadn't noticed the signs of her daughter's brewing cold. "It's okay, baby," she murmured. "I'm here." She rocked Bella gently for a while, humming whatever tune came to mind, before realizing they were out of baby food, and the crackers she'd stashed in her bag were already gone. Her stomach tightened. After dressing quietly and managing to slip out without waking Bella again, Emma walked the cracked sidewalk to the motel lobby, where two ancient vending machines sat beside a dusty ice machine. She fumbled for her wallet, digging for quarters. She had just enough for one small container of applesauce. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. Emma hit the side of the machine. Still nothing. Her frustration boiled over as she hit the button harder. "You've got to be kidding me!" A low, calm voice came from behind her. "Need a hand?" She froze. Turning slowly, she found herself face to face with the man from the other side of the wall. He looked even more out of place now than he had in her imagination. Tall, broad-shouldered, in an expensive-looking navy coat, though it was unbuttoned and casually draped. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his brown eyes piercing and alert, like he was always thinking 5 steps ahead. Emma stepped back, suddenly self-conscious in her worn-out hoodie and sneakers. "It's fine. I'm just trying to get this thing to work. Mind if I try?" he asked. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He pulled a crisp bill from his wallet and fed it into the machine. The keypad beeped to life. A few taps later, the machine rattled and finally dropped the applesauce, along with a granola bar and a bag of crackers. Emma blinked. "I only needed one." He held up a hand. "It's fine. You look like you needed more than one." She opened her mouth to say thank you, but nothing came out at first. Something in his voice, calm but warm, disarmed her. "I'm Emma," she said finally. "Elias," he replied. Their eyes met. A strange flicker passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps. Recognition of pain the other didn't name aloud. "I'm in room 7, he said after a moment. "Next to yours, I think." She nodded. "Room 8. He smiled faintly. "Nice to meet you, room 8. She almost laughed. "Almost." Elias glanced toward the hallway. "Little one yours?" Emma tensed instinctively. "Yes." He didn't flinch at her sudden defensiveness. Just nodded once, then added gently, "Hope she feels better soon." Then, without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the hallway. Emma stared after him, applesauce in one hand, questions in the other. Back in the room, Bella was sitting up in bed, drowsy-eyed and flushed. Emma quickly fed her the applesauce, helping her eat between coughs and sleepy whines. She was too tired to do much else, and before long, she was curled up against Emma's chest again, dozing off. Emma sat there holding her daughter, but her mind drifted to the man next door. His presence was strange, comforting in a way she couldn't explain. He didn't belong in a place like this, with his sharp clothes and easy confidence, but something about him didn't feel fake. Something about him felt off track, the way she felt. Later that afternoon, Emma stepped out to get more formula. When she returned, she found a small paper bag resting on the floor just outside her room. Inside was a small bottle of electrolyte drink, 2 baby food jars, and a note on plain white paper that simply read, "Just in case, room 7. Emma stood frozen in place for a full minute, blinking at the handwriting. No one had looked after her like this in years. Certainly not her ex-husband. No one had done anything without expecting something in return. She tucked the bag under her arm and stepped inside, heart thudding louder than she cared to admit. She didn't know what Elias Carter was doing at a rundown roadside motel, or why a man like him would care if a stranger's toddler had enough food. But she knew one thing. He wasn't just passing through. And somehow neither was she. Emma didn't knock on his door. Not that night. Not the next morning either. But every time she passed room 7 on her way to get ice or snacks or fresh towels, her eyes flicked to it with a strange sense of awareness, as if something had changed. Not between them exactly, there hadn't been enough of a them for change, but within her. Elias had left that small brown paper bag at her door like it was nothing. But it wasn't. Not to her. It wasn't just formula and fruit jars. It was care. Quiet, unasked for, no strings attached care. Something she hadn't known in a very long time. Bella's fever went down by the second morning. Her energy returned in small bursts, tiny giggles, a wandering crawl across the stained motel carpet, and a renewed obsession with her purple stuffed bunny. By late afternoon, Emma dared to take her outside for some air. There was a tiny strip of patchy grass near the parking lot, bordered by a rusted bench and a crooked tree. Not a playground, not even a yard, but it was open sky and space to move. She laid down a blanket, let Bella wobble on her feet, and sat watching, occasionally sipping lukewarm motel coffee. Elias appeared quietly, walking out of the main office, talking on the phone. He wore a dark sweater this time, casual jeans, but he still stood out like a painting in a room full of smudged photos. His expression was focused, brow furrowed as he spoke. "No, I said leave the deal on the table. Let them sweat. If they want a counteroffer, they'll call." A pause. "Because I know them better than they think I do?" He hung up, turning, and paused when he spotted Emma. She nodded slightly in greeting, not expecting more. But to her surprise, he walked over. "Mind if I join?" he asked, motioning to the bench. "Sure," she said, blinking. He sat resting his hands loosely in his lap. For a moment, they just watched Bella toddle between blades of grass and tiny rocks. "She's better," he said. Emma nodded. "Thanks to you." He glanced at her. "I doubt my overpriced juice did much." "It did more than you think," she said, her tone quiet but clear. "We haven't had anyone on our side for a long time." Ilias looked back at Bella. "I get that." She studied his profile in silence for a moment before finally asking, "Why are you here?" He smiled faintly. "You mean in a place like this?" She nodded. "You don't exactly blend in." "I'm not trying to," he said, voice softer now. "I needed somewhere people didn't expect me to be." Emma tilted her head. "Are you hiding?" He shrugged. "Escaping. From what?" He hesitated. For a second, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "My sister died last year." Suddenly, aneurysm, no warning. She was 38, a mother, the best person I've ever known. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "She was raising my niece alone," he continued, "after her husband died in a car accident. And I was never around. Too busy, too important, until I wasn't." His words were slow, deliberate, not rehearsed, not dramatic, just honest. "I got temporary guardianship," he said. "Tried to juggle boardrooms and bottle feedings. It didn't work. I lost her, too. CPS found a family willing to take her in full time. I didn't fight it." Emma's heart ached. "I didn't think I could be enough for her," he said. "And by the time I realized I might have been wrong, it was too late." Silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle breeze and Bella's quiet babbling as she played. "I'm sorry," Emma said at last. "For your sister. For all of it." Elias nodded. "Thank you." They sat there for a while longer, not speaking, just existing. Finally, Emma said, "I was married for 6 years. At first it was good, or it looked good. Then it turned controlling. Quietly at first, then loudly. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a clean life, a quiet wife. I stopped being a person to him." She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe because he had shared first. Maybe because it felt safe. "I left when he slammed the door hard enough to make Bella scream. That was my line. I packed one bag, picked her up, and walked away. No job, no apartment, just gone." Their eyes met again, and in that look, something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, recognition. Elias stood slowly, brushing invisible dust off his jeans. "I've got an early call tomorrow," he said, "but I'll be around." Emma nodded, unsure what else to say. As he turned to walk away, he paused, looked over his shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Emma Brooks." She blinked, caught completely off guard. He smiled slightly. "Room 8, right?" She smiled back. "Room 7. He walked off, leaving her with Bella, the fading light, and a sense that something had shifted inside her. Not just hope, but the start of something unfamiliar and entirely real. The next day began quietly, but not without tension. Emma felt it before she even opened her eyes. an undercurrent buzzing beneath the surface of everything. Bella was still asleep, curled like a comma beside her on the bed, her tiny fingers twisted in Emma's shirt. The room was too warm, the light leaking through the curtains too harsh, and her thoughts wouldn't stop racing. She had barely slept. Not because of fear or noise, but because of Elias Carter. She tried to tell herself their conversation the day before was just a moment, a rare collision of two lost people sharing pieces of grief and guilt. But that wasn't the whole truth. Something else had passed between them. It had felt solid, intentional, and it scared her more than she wanted to admit. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, ran her fingers through her tangled hair, and stared at the beige wall in front of her. It was the same cracked paint, the same buzzing light fixture, but something in her had changed. For the first time in months, she wasn't entirely focused on survival. For the first time, her thoughts wandered toward possibility. She got Bella dressed in a soft lavender onesie and a jacket too thin for the weather. They went out together to the gas station down the street, Emma clutching her prepaid debit card tightly, scanning every price tag, calculating each dollar. They returned with instant oatmeal, milk, and a coloring book for Bella, which Emma justified because of the 4 extra hours it might buy her to think in peace. Back at the motel, room 7's door was ajar. Not wide open, just a sliver, enough to suggest someone forgot to close it or maybe wanted to be found. Emma hesitated as she passed, glancing inside. Elias was seated at the desk near the window, phone pressed between his shoulder and cheek, laptop open in front of him. He was in the middle of what sounded like a tense call. "No, we're not going to launch until I say we're ready. I don't care how nervous the investors are. We're not chasing a headline. We're building something real." His voice wasn't raised, but it was firm, controlled. As Emma stepped by, he looked up and caught her eye. She froze. He held her gaze for a second, then gave a slight nod. It wasn't a wave. It was more like a quiet invitation. She returned the nod but kept walking, pulse racing. Later that afternoon, Bella fell asleep while scribbling on her new coloring book, and Emma found herself outside again, sitting at the same weathered bench with her jacket zipped up to her chin. The air had turned colder. She pulled the sleeves down over her hands, staring at the trees across the lot, bare and motionless. Ilias joined her 5 minutes later. No announcement, no warning. He simply sat beside her and offered a coffee cup. "I didn't know how you take it," he said. She took it, wrapping both hands around the warmth. "Black is fine," she said. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee, watching cars pass by on the nearby road. Then he said, "I called my lawyer today." Emma blinked. "Okay, why?" "I asked him to review a custody case," he said calmly. "Hypothetical. A mother, recently divorced, low income, no stable residence yet, but full custody of a toddler. A father with money, reputation, and no soul." Emma's spine stiffened. Ilias turned to her. "I didn't use your name, but I described your situation." "And what did he say?" she asked quietly. "That if the father decides to push, you might be in trouble," he said. "Not because you're unfit, because the system favors stability and money." She swallowed hard. "I know." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Emma stared at it, not reaching for it. "What is that?" "My lawyer's number, his personal cell. He's discreet, aggressive when needed, and he owes me more than one favor." "I can't pay him," she said, her voice tight. "You won't have to," Ilias replied. "I'll cover it." Emma shook her head immediately. "I can't accept that. It's not charity," he cut in. "It's fairness. You've been playing against a loaded deck. I'm just giving you a few more cards." She stared at him, heart pounding. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He met her gaze, steady and calm. "Because someone should have done it for my sister," he said. "And because I know what it's like to love someone so much, it breaks you when the world tries to pull them away." Emma looked down at the paper. Her hands shook as she finally took it. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to say anything," Elias said. "Just let someone fight with you, not against you." The weight of that hit her harder than she expected. That night, after Bella was tucked in, and the room had grown quiet again, Emma sat on the floor next to the heater with the paper still in her hand. The name, the number, the silent offer of help. She didn't know what this thing between her and Elias was becoming. Friendship? Something more? All she knew was that she wasn't alone anymore. And that changed everything. The letter arrived 2 days later, slipped under the motel room door like a knife beneath the skin of her new life. Emma found it early in the morning while going to fetch Bella's drop pacifier. A thick envelope, unmarked except for a typed address, to Ms. Emma Brooks. No stamp. No return label. Her name exposed and vulnerable in stark black ink. Her chest tightened before she even opened it. She already knew. She ripped the envelope open with shaking hands and unfolded the document inside. A legal summons. Her ex-husband was filing for emergency custody. Her eyes darted over the printed words. Unstable environment, unfit housing, questionable emotional condition, potential risk to child's well-being. It wasn't just cruel, it was calculated, weaponized. He was using her poverty as proof of her inadequacy. The fact that she and Bella lived in a motel? Evidence. The lack of childcare? A red flag. The absence of a job offer since she left? Grounds for intervention. Emma's breath caught. The walls felt like they were closing in. Her vision blurred. Bella was playing quietly on the floor nearby, pushing a toy car across the carpet, unaware that her world was shifting beneath her tiny feet again. Emma crumpled the paper in her hand and rushed to the bathroom, shutting the door behind her before her tears could reach her daughter's ears. She sat on the closed toilet seat and sobbed silently into her hands. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. She had sacrificed everything to protect her daughter. From the verbal manipulation, from the emotional abandonment, from growing up in a house that taught silence instead of self-worth. And now he wanted to take her away? Because she didn't have granite countertops and health insurance? Because she had the audacity to start over? When she finally pulled herself together, her face blotchy and her hands trembling, she walked back into the room and scooped Bella up into her arms. She held her close, inhaling her baby shampoo, her warmth, her life. She didn't deserve this. Neither of them did. By noon, the letter was still on the nightstand, staring at her like a silent threat. Emma hadn't called Elias. Not yet. Pride burned too loudly in her throat. But by 2 p.m., she was pacing, chewing the inside of her cheek, her mind replaying every worst-case scenario. At 2:37 p.m., she dialed the number Elias had given her. A man with a clipped tone answered. Jonathan Price. Hi. I was told to call you. Elias Carter gave me your number. There was a pause, then the voice shifted, warmer but no less direct. Yes. What's happening? Emma told him everything. The letter, the accusations, the living situation. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she didn't stop. She laid it all bare. When she finished, Jonathan's voice was calm and confident. I've handled cases like this before, and much worse. You're not out of options, Emma. You're just out of support. Until now. Her throat tightened. I don't have any way to pay. Already covered, he said. Mr. Carter made that clear. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. Thank you. We'll start with a response filing. Then we'll demand mediation. I'll send you a list of documents to gather. Don't speak to your ex or his attorney directly. Everything comes through me now. She hung up the phone 10 minutes later, armed with instructions, timelines, and for the first time since the nightmare began, a feeling that she wasn't alone in it anymore. She wanted to wait until evening to thank Elias, to gather herself, to not seem as desperate as she felt. But her emotions betrayed her. At 5 p.m., she knocked on room 7's door. He answered almost instantly, as if he'd been expecting it. His expression shifted the moment he saw her face. He filed, didn't he? She nodded, her voice catching. He wants to take her from me. Elias opened the door wider without a word and stepped aside. Emma walked in slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. She told him everything. Again. This time not as facts over the phone, but as a mother on the edge of collapse. She paced. She wept. She cursed her ex's cruelty, the system's blindness, her own fear. Elias didn't interrupt. Didn't offer hollow reassurances. He just listened. Present, steady. When she finally sank into the worn armchair across the room, exhausted, he walked over and knelt in front of her. I meant what I said, Emma, he told her gently. You're not alone in this. She looked at him, really looked, and asked the question that had haunted her since the day he brought her applesauce from the vending machine. Why do you care? His answer was quiet but immediate. Because you remind me of the people I failed. And because I see someone who's fighting for her child the way I should have fought harder for mine. And because maybe I need to believe it's not too late for me to get something right. Emma's lip quivered. Her guard shattered. She didn't think. She just leaned forward and hugged him. Not a polite thank you. Not a brief gesture. A full, desperate, honest embrace. And Elias. He wrapped his arms around her like it was instinct. Like it was something he'd been waiting to do for a long time. That night when she returned to room 8, Bella was still sleeping soundly, arms spread wide like she owned the whole bed. Emma sat beside her and touched her daughter's tiny hand. They were still in a motel. The fight had only just begun. But something had changed. Now they had someone in their corner. Someone who cared not because he had to, but because he chose to. And sometimes that was enough to keep going. The court hearing was scheduled for exactly 3 weeks from the day the letter arrived. But to Emma, time moved in strange, jagged shapes after that, both too fast and impossibly slow. Every day felt like a small mountain to climb. Phone calls with Elias's lawyer, form after form filled out, chasing down copies of Bella's medical records, old receipts, even photos to prove she'd been Bella's constant parent. Every night she collapsed into bed next to her daughter, trying to stay strong, while the world around her felt like it could collapse with the next knock on the door. Elias checked in on her every day. Sometimes it was subtle, sliding an envelope under her door with printed court resources or a new toy for Bella to keep her distracted. Other times it was more direct, bringing her takeout when she'd clearly forgotten to eat, or showing up at the park bench where she took Bella to get fresh air, sitting beside her in silence. Emma tried to resist at first. She wasn't used to accepting help without a price, but Elias never pushed. He never made her feel small for struggling. If anything, he seemed to understand exactly how hard it was to admit you needed someone, and still ask. One cold afternoon, a few days before their first hearing, Emma sat outside with Bella bundled in her lap. The sun was low, the trees bare, and everything around them was gray, except for the streaks of gold in Bella's curls and the soft pink of her mittens. Emma rested her cheek on the top of Bella's head, staring blankly at the cracked pavement of the motel's parking lot. Elias appeared without warning. Again. "You always walk like a ghost," she said without turning her head. "Old habit," he replied, trying not to be noticed. She glanced at him. He was wearing a wool coat over a simple sweater, no tie, no business armor. Just Elias. Real and human. "I wanted to show you something," he said. Emma blinked. "What?" He sat beside her and pulled out a photo from his coat pocket. It was wrinkled at the edges. Worn. A little girl around 4 years old smiled up at the camera, with bright eyes and missing front teeth. She had long curls and a pink dress. Standing behind her was a younger version of Elias. Less tired, more polished, but with the same eyes. "My niece," he said. "Her name was June." Emma stared at the photo. "She was everything to my sister," he said quietly. "And after Claire died, I tried to step in. But I didn't know what I was doing. I was too busy trying to stay in control of everything. My company, the estate, the press. I let social services take her when they said I couldn't be full-time. I didn't fight. I didn't even ask the right questions." His voice wavered. "I thought money and logic would fix everything. But all June needed was someone to stay. To try." Emma looked at him, her throat tight. "She's in a good home now," he continued. "Happy, safe. But I think about her every day. I wonder if she remembers me, if she thinks I gave up on her." He folded the photo and slid it back into his coat. "That's why I care about you and Bella," he said. "Because you never gave up. You have nothing and you're still here, still standing. That matters." Emma blinked rapidly, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," Elias said. "But we do it anyway." They sat like that side by side until Bella stirred and asked for juice, unaware of the ghosts her mother and Elias had just brought into the sunlight. The day before the hearing, Jonathan Price, Elias's lawyer, met with Emma in person. He was sharp, efficient, but kind. He went over the strategy with her in the motel lobby, using a stack of sticky notes and color-coded tabs. "We have enough to stall his request for emergency custody," he said. "Your ex may have resources, but he doesn't have substance. No daily involvement, no record of consistent support. And you? You've got photos, schedules, doctor visits. You've got witnesses, including your caseworker from the shelter. Emma nodded slowly, her nerves eating her alive. What if the judge doesn't care? Then we appeal, Jonathan said. But we fight. That's what matters. That night, Elias knocked on her door. He held a thermos of chamomile tea and a small card. Thought you might need both, he said. She took them, smiling through her nerves. I'm scared I'll fall apart in that courtroom. Then I'll be there to help you back up. She looked at the card. It was blank on the outside. Inside, in his handwriting, you've already won. Tomorrow is just the part where the rest of the world catches up. Emma held the card to her chest. When she finally went to bed, she didn't cry. She didn't spiral. She lay beside her daughter, heart still pounding, but steady, grounded. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't walking into the fire alone. She had her voice, her story, and someone beside her who believed she deserved to be heard. The courtroom was colder than Emma expected, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. Sterile, impersonal. As if no one here really cared about the weight of the decisions made inside its walls. She sat at the long wooden table beside Jonathan Price, clutching a folded tissue in her palm like a lifeline, eyes darting nervously to the rows of empty seats behind her. Until she saw Elias. He entered quietly wearing a dark charcoal suit that somehow made him look more like himself and less like the CEO the world knew. His presence was calm, steady. Their eyes met across the room, and for the first time all morning, Emma felt the ground under her feet stop shifting. He gave her the faintest nod, the kind of signal that said, "You're not alone. Not today. Not anymore." Jonathan leaned in. "Ready?" She wasn't. She was terrified, but she nodded anyway. "Yes." Across from them sat her ex-husband, dressed in an expensive blazer and false charm. He didn't look at Emma. Not once. His lawyer did all the speaking. A well-groomed man with a voice like oil, polite but pointed. His strategy was clear. Portray Emma as unstable, financially incapable, emotionally reactive, unfit. He mentioned the motel 3 times in the first 5 minutes. Emma's hands trembled under the table, but she held her head high. She wasn't going to disappear. Jonathan was brilliant, calm, sharp, and utterly unflinching. He dismantled every assumption, piece by piece, with documents, photographs, timelines, and the careful testimony of a caseworker from the shelter Emma had briefly visited before finding the motel. The woman, soft-spoken and compassionate, testified that Emma had never once asked for anything more than guidance. Never money, never special treatment. Just help to stand on her own. Then Emma was called to the stand. Her legs were weak as she walked, but when she sat down and took the oath, something inside her clicked into place. She spoke clearly, honestly. She told the court what had happened. The emotional control, the abandonment, the choice she made to walk away with nothing, because nothing was better than raising her child in silence and fear. She admitted she didn't have much, but she had love. She had safety. She had her daughter's trust. She sleeps peacefully now, Emma said, her voice catching. She laughs. She plays. I don't want to lose that, not because I'm poor or alone or don't have granite countertops, but because I'm present. I'm here, every single day. There was a hush in the room when she stepped down. Her ex never looked at her. He leaned in and whispered to his lawyer, but the confidence in his posture had wavered. When it was over, the judge took a short recess to review documents. Emma sat at the table, shoulders tense, eyes locked on the floor. Elias came to her quietly, kneeling beside her chair. No matter what happens in there, he said, you showed them who you are. You showed me. Emma turned, barely holding back tears. What if it's not enough? It already is, he said. They returned to the courtroom, and the judge delivered his decision in a voice that felt far too calm for something so massive. Custody would remain with Emma. There were no grounds for transfer, no evidence of neglect, and most importantly, no justification for separating a child from the only stable and loving parent she knew. Emma's breath hitched. For a moment, she didn't believe what she'd heard. Then Jonathan touched her elbow. You did it, he whispered. She looked back at Elias, who had already stood, his smile quiet but unmistakable. Emma cried then, silently, the way strong people do when they finally don't have to be strong. She covered her mouth, trembling. Relief wasn't even the word. It was something deeper, something more holy. Outside the courthouse, she held Bella in her arms while reporters buzzed like bees around a different case across the street. No one cared about her story. No one cared about her victory. But that made it hers, pure, untouched. Elias stood beside her, not in front, not leading, just beside. "Come home with me," he said softly. "Not permanently, not until you're ready. Just for now. So you don't have to go back to that motel tonight." Emma looked at Bella, then at Elias, then finally at herself, reflected faintly in the glass of the courthouse doors. She was no longer the woman who had fled in the dark with a bag and a baby. She was something stronger. She nodded. "Okay." He reached for her hand. She let him take it, and together they walked towards something new. Not perfect, but finally possible. It had been 6 months since the custody hearing. 6 months since Emma stood in a courtroom, heart in her throat, with her daughter's future hanging by a thread. 6 months since the judge ruled in her favor and returned her life, piece by piece, back into her hands. And now, on a spring afternoon filled with the scent of lilacs and distant birdsong, Emma sat barefoot on the back porch of Elias's countryside home, watching Bella chase soap bubbles across the grass. The house was quiet but alive. It wasn't a mansion, though it was spacious. Every corner had been softened, made warm not by money but by presence. The once pristine guest house had become Emma's workspace, where she now illustrated children's books for 3 independent publishers. Bella had her own bedroom, painted soft yellow, with hand-drawn stars on the ceiling and a reading nook made from pillows. Elias still traveled for work occasionally, but more often than not, he was home. Not in a performative way. He didn't hover or try to play dad overnight, but in a deeply intentional way. He was there for breakfast, for bedtime stories, for early morning walks around the orchard when Bella couldn't sleep. He never tried to replace anyone in Bella's life. He simply showed up and never stopped. That day, Emma sat with a sketch pad on her lap and a pencil in her hand, half distracted as she watched Elias crouch down on the lawn, letting Bella pour soapy water over his expensive loafers while pretending he was King Bubbleman. He wore a plastic crown she had made from a cereal box and looked at her like he was wearing gold. When he finally stood and walked toward the porch, Bella trailing behind him like a giggling shadow, Emma's heart swelled in a way that still surprised her. Not because she loved him, she had accepted that long ago, but because she trusted him completely. "You're covered in foam," she said, laughing as he reached for the towel she handed him. "All in the name of royalty," Elias replied, drying his hands. "How's the sketch?" "Unfinished," she admitted, "but almost there." "Like us," he said. Emma looked up, surprised. "Us?" He sat beside her, their knees touching, the air between them heavy with something unsaid. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said. "Dangerous," she teased. He smiled but didn't laugh. His eyes were serious, warm. "When I first met you, you were surviving. You were fierce, determined, but your heart was barricaded, and I didn't blame you. Life had kicked you down so many times I was afraid one more blow would break you, but you didn't break. You bloomed." Emma stared at him, emotion rising in her throat. "You brought color into my life, into Bella's, into this house. You rebuilt everything from nothing. You didn't ask to be saved. You saved us. And I don't want another day to pass without telling you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. Simple, silver, not flashy, beautiful in its quiet strength. "I'm not asking you to start over again. I'm asking you to continue, with me, as my wife, as Bella's safe place, as our future." Emma froze. Tears welled in her eyes, unfiltered and full. "I never thought I'd be here," she whispered. "Not like this. Not happy." "You are," Elias said gently, "and you deserve to be." Bella toddled over then, hugging her mom's leg without any idea what was happening. She looked up and asked, "Mama, are you crying happy or sad?" Emma laughed through her tears. "Happy, sweetheart. Very, very happy." She looked back at Elias. "Yes," she said. "Of course, yes." He smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger with a hand that trembled just slightly. Later that evening, when the sun dipped below the trees and the fireflies blinked into view, They danced barefoot in the grass. Just the three of them. No music, no ceremony, just laughter, joy, and the kind of peace that feels like it's been earned. And as Emma watched the man who had once been her neighbor in a cheap motel spin their daughter around in circles, her heart whispered the one truth she had come to know above all else. The hardest roads sometimes lead home. In my opinion, the ending of this story is not just satisfying, it's deeply earned. Emma's journey began in survival mode, wounded, exhausted, and unsure of her place in the world. But by the final chapter, she isn't simply rescued, she reclaims her strength. That's what makes this ending powerful. Her happy ending doesn't come from finding a rich man. It comes from finding herself first, and then allowing someone to love her because of who she is, not in spite of it. Elias, too, isn't a fairy tale prince. He's a man with regret, scars, and his own emotional debt. But he chooses to show up, not to fix Emma, but to walk beside her. That kind of quiet, steady love is rare in stories like this, and even rarer in real life. Their union feels real because it's built on mutual healing. The proposal isn't dramatic, it's intimate, gentle, born out of shared truth and trust. The final image, the three of them dancing barefoot under fireflies, isn't just romantic. It's symbolic. It's joy after hardship, light after dark. To me, that's the heart of the story. Not a rescue, but a rise.